And I don't know if Robert Frost was talking about Bernie Sanders, but Bernie Sanders fits the bill. For over 40 years, Bernie Sanders has been a profound moral voice and a guide and a North Star and our hope, or progressive hope, in a world that is collapsing all around us. When I was a young man reading Howard Zinn and trying to consider and absorbing the epic struggle for civil rights that gave us some of the most magnificent political fighters and thinkers and writers of our time, Martin Luther King, these great powerful legacies, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Baker, Angela Davis, Dorothy Day and the Catholic Worker, Eugene Debs, the Berrigan brothers, public intellectuals like Noam Chomsky, who would later influence everybody from Public Enemy to The Clash. Yeah. Learning about the meaning and the legacy of FDR and the New Deal from my father because he lived it. And knowing that my father's generation was working for and waiting for the next movement to finally finish what FDR started. I mean, but it's been a long road. And but these were titanic ideas and figures. But in the public life, in the public sphere, it seemed their time had passed. And in the early 80s, it was a much more jingoistic time. Some of us old timers remember it. And it was pretty barren out there. But then this congressman named Bernie Sanders came on the scene, and he was beautiful, man. I mean, he was just beautiful. His voice was singular and unrelentingly powerful in its moral clarity. And he said all the things that cannot be said. And the guy was absolutely fearless. And I thought, here's a guy with the future in his eyes. I mean, this was a man with a deep and a powerful connection to the truth. And he's a person with remarkable courage who proclaimed the absolute need for justice, equality, and dignity for all people. And he offered a principled, visionary critique of American empire as a counter-narrative to the jingoism of the day. He publicly, loudly, boldly rejected the hideous lie that unchecked greed, the predatory greed of capitalism in all of its cruelty, was good. And that this greed was, in fact, the planet's only means of survival, that we must all bow allegiance to this ruling orthodoxy of Earth. Bernie kept telling us there was another, better way, and he kept telling the truth. But he told us what we needed to hear, not what we wanted to hear, because Bernie Sanders respects you. He respects us. When a person respects you, they tell you the truth. Sometimes the truth's not pleasant. Sometimes illusions can be seductive, but he was always unrelentingly honest. And as it is with truth tellers, he was often speaking this truth alone. Sometimes famously and literally a lone man in an empty chamber house, bearing witness for the victims of another war built and sold on lies. This was clearly a very special man. This was a man with vision. This was a man with the Holy Spirit in him. And this was a fighter with less quinine than anybody I've ever seen. And over these 40 years, he spoke, he worked, he organized, he would not go away. He made himself a most troublesome man for those in power. He was not obedient. He did not bow down to the almighty corporate dollar. And he never took that road more traveled. He never took the easier, softer way. That's not who the guy is. And this is not. It's not in his DNA. And it occurred to some of us over these 40 years, this neoliberal period, it became clear that this guy was one of the true inheritors of the mantle of great American prophetic voices for justice in America. And he stands shoulder to shoulder with those in history who have been the moral conscience of our time. And like Dr. King, who we celebrate on Monday, Bernie Sanders voiced the forbidden connections between capitalism, imperialism, racism, sexism, yes, even global warming in the 80s, you can look it up, and the era of endless wars that he saw coming, and the war economies that Eisenhower warned about. And for these 40 years, we've endured class warfare from above. And for 40 years, Bernie Sanders was there fighting back. And you know what? For 4 decades, Bernie was right. Again and again and again. We have never, ever, ever in our lifetime had a candidate who will do more for working people than Bernie Sanders. We don't need a further winnowing out process. We know who the most progressive person is. It's Bernie Sanders. We have the candidate. We have never, ever in our lifetimes had a truer champion of social, economic, and climate justice this close to the White House. It's the truth. So don't sleepwalk through the miracle. This guy's been a profile of courage and clarity and consistency for 40 years. But it's important to know that his critique of this 40-year neoliberal period was right and true. His prophetic warnings have come to pass. Sadly, the planet is faltering in the face of relentless corporate plunder, and billionaires are tightening their stranglehold on public policy, and violence and fascism is spreading around the globe. This 40-year-old neoliberal assault on the New Deal has been defined by these trends, and this ruling ideology oversaw the greatest upward redistribution of wealth in the history of the country, largely, of course, on the backs of working class and the poorest and most vulnerable among us. And in this ideology that has ruled us, in this world upside down, this morally bankrupt logic, the government's only job, it seemed, was to create optimal conditions for corporate profit, to privatize everything in sight and sell off every inch of the Commonwealth, maximize corporate profit at all costs. It'd be a perfect system if there were no human beings. But as Bernie told us, those free markets, well, they ain't so free. But corporate welfare was alive and well. The system seems to be socialize the risk, privatize the profit, a social contract based on fear, cruelty, and greed. Like the gangsters in the movie say, screw you, pay me. The whole deadly political circus is about greed. And in this movement, we honestly admit that unchecked, deregulated capitalism is the issue. Class is the issue. Now, runaway inequality has created a world where 62 people own as much wealth as the poorest half of the world's population. And you know what? Bernie saw it all coming. Saw it all a mile away. And I guess this is a long-winded way of getting to the point. In the age of Twitter and 2-second histories, Bernie Sanders has been saying what has only till recently been fashionable for 40 years. He saw it and he said it from jump, and he said it for decades when he was greeted with ridicule, hostility, and scorn. This is what makes him prophetic. He has the vision and the depth to deal with the problems we face because he brings a lifetime of experience to the table. He's literally put his body and his soul and his integrity on the line for us his whole life. And today, Bernie is by far the most popular politician in America, right? And the good news is, I don't know if you've heard about it, but this same man, the guy with the future in his eyes, filled with the spirit and the compassion, the fierce love for his fellow brothers and sisters, that same gentleman happens to be leading a revolutionary movement that is unprecedented, truly, in American history. But we got to take back that meaning of the word revolution. It's not a Nike commercial or a can of soda. It's not a brand. Bernie Sanders is talking about a radical redistribution of economic and political power. He's talking about a real revolution, not top down, but bottom up. And the billionaire class are getting very, very nervous. And all the corporate media is against us. And it seems like every conceivable power structure is trying to kill or derail our movement. But we're still here. Because we know that the unchecked greed of predatory capitalism takes and takes whatever, whenever, however it wants. And it will take everything. It'll take our lives, our labor, our spirits, our air, water, and even our earth. Bernie respects us enough to tell us the hard truth. We have a 10 to 12-year window to radically transform our energy system, or climate change and predatory capitalism and the endless war economies will rob us of a right to any future at all. And as we see every day, the house is literally on fire. But as Bernie tells us, this is no time for despair. There is no time for anything but action. If we stand together with him, the future is truly unwritten. And there's nothing more powerful than a movement whose time has come. Now, just to keep in your mind, we have never, ever had a movement candidate this close to power with a revolutionary movement he's led and built that's ready to go with him all the way to change the country and help heal the world. We've never had that. When people of every race, faith, and gender, when we all stand together in solidarity, when all of us whose labor powers the economy stop the profiteering and say no more and tell the billionaires and the corporate tyrannies it's time to start treating all human beings with respect and dignity. To name just a few examples, Medicare for all, healthcare as a human right, public colleges and universities tuition free, canceling student debt, medical debt relief, guaranteeing a living wage, and most crucially, transforming the economy with the Green New Deal, which will be, by necessity and fact, the biggest economic transformation of the United States since World War II. So, has the world caught up to Bernie's moral vision? It's up to us. But there are encouraging signs. I don't know if you've noticed, but the corporate media, they kind of hate us. Well, they pretended like they hated us, then they ignored us, and then now they just seem really confused. Wall Street hates us. Drug companies hate us. Insurance companies hate us. The military-industrial complex hates us. And the 1% of the 1%, they hate us. They don't really hate. They fear us. And you want to know why? We're going to take on their greed and corruption, and we're going to win. And we're going to make a more just and humane and decent America. Now, let me ask you a question. What is 100% minus 1%? I like our chances. Anyway, thank you all so much. And I would like to introduce to you a woman who needs no introduction, but she is, I think, as visionary a thinker, a speaker, and a mind as Bernie Sanders. And I can't think of anybody that I'm prouder to call a friend than Naomi Klein. Thank you.
Team, subscribe for more of these type of videos.